Okay, this is my Singer machine, my hand-me-down machine. Again, this is for super newbie people, so if you know how to sew or you've sewn already, just skip to a different video so you don't give me hater comments. This is the pedal. You press on it, and it makes the needle go up and down. You can do this. It plugs into your machine, and that cord plugs into the wall for your power. You're going to have a power button. Mine is over here. It makes this little light come on, which is very handy. You've got your spindles here where your thread sits. Each machine is threaded differently, so similar but different. This is your bobbin winder. This is a bobbin. If you don't know what a bobbin is, that's what it is. And that is what provides thread for the underside of your fabric. And then they lock together. I'm sure there are much better videos that show how the machine works on the inside. And I would suggest you do a little search for how that works so you can understand what's actually going on here. This little deal is called a presser foot. And it has a little lever in the back that makes it go up and down, and that pushes your fabric together so that you can sew two things together. So if you had two pieces of fabric you wanted to sew together, they would go under here, and you would put your presser foot down, and now there's a little bit of tension. I can't really pull this off. And then as the needle goes up and down and connects with the thread underneath from the bobbin thread, it will feed this scrap of fabric through with these little zigzag feet. I think they're called dog feet. I can't remember what the actual term is for those. And it'll feed your fabric through. When people talk about tension, sometimes they're talking about the actual thread tension, which is on my machine here. And that will determine how tight my thread is. But sometimes it's actually tension from the presser foot itself. So if you've got some really thick fabrics, maybe you're making a fleece blanket, that's usually a good beginner project. Your two fabrics might actually be too thick, and it might be catching on the bottom, or it might not be catching on the bottom. And then you've got two pieces of fabric that are being, instead of going through at one piece, they're actually being fed unevenly. And so the top piece might actually, I can't do this with one hand, might actually slide as the bottom one is being fed through the machine. So that's something to keep in mind, as how thick your fabric might be if you start having problems. This is how my machine is threaded. Again, you're going to have a different machine, I'm sure, so you should probably just look at a video that does your particular machine. For mine, there's this little eye hook that it goes through first, and I can actually just slide instead of feeding it through the hook, there's a little shortcut, and you can just pull it through the back, and it's already through the eye. Then as you go down here, it looks really complicated. It scared me at first. See these like different little wheels? That's for if you're sewing with double thread. Don't worry about that. You're not doing that right now. So all you have to do is feed it behind. Oopsie, not behind there. I've never done that in my life. Okay, there we go. Feed it right here and pull it up, and it's going to go through this little hook thing magically with just a little pull. And then I'm going to rotate my needle. And when I do that, when I spin this little doohickey, I don't know what it's called, it makes my needle go up and down, but it also makes this little eyelet go up and down. So my thread needs to go through that. So there's a little eyelet on there, and instead of making the thread go through, there's a little slit in the back. You can't even see it, but all I have to do is lay my thread behind it and pull it forward, and bingo, it's automatically through. Easy peasy. Then my machine has this little guide hole here, and again, instead of trying to thread it through that little eyelet, there's a little catch on the side. Ping! Bingo, through the hole. Then I've got this little slit guide here, and I'm going to go front to back and then pull it. Oops, sorry about that. I'll show you again. Front to back and then pull it to the front again. And the very last piece here is my needle. And again, you're going to go front to back. I'm going to put a little bit of moisture on the end of that to make it go through a little easier. Front to back. Pull that little guy out there. And then make sure it is from the front of my presser foot guiding out the back. So here's the back of my thread. Now for the bobbin, you're going to open your bottom plate by sliding it open. And that is the bobbin casing where your bobbin's going to sit, and it's going to thread itself down and under, and it's going to come up through this little hole here. And I'll show you how to do that. So I've got my thread, and I'm going to put it in there like so. I've already wound it. That's probably going to be a different video. And there's two little slots here. I'm going to put it through the first one, and there's an angle, so I'm going to follow the angle. Okay, take it to the second one, pull it through to the back. So far, so good. And I don't know if this makes a difference or not, but this is what my mom told me to do. She said to put it at an angle across the machine like that. I'm going to close my bobbin casing. Okay, now here's the problem. I've got a thread coming out of this crack here, but it needs to come out of that little hole. And what happens is when you rotate the needle goes down into the bobbin casing, and it's going to pick up this bobbin thread and bring it back up through the hole. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back over to our wheel, and we're going to wind it towards us. And as I wind it, one rotation, the needle goes down, the needle comes back up, and then I use my my seam ripper to just take all these threads and pull them to the back of my machine. And it doesn't look like it got it. So see, I still have my thread coming up through the slit, so I'm going to do it again. Probably have to hold on to this thread, and I can't do it while I'm videoing. So I'm pulling it back up. And oh, I still didn't grab it. Okay, I can't do this in video at the same time. Let's see if that will show you anything. Holding onto my thread, and I'm pulling this. There we go. Okay, so I'm pulling this thread from the back, and there's a little loop, and I'm just going to grab the little loop, pull all these threads out to the back, and now I have a thread coming up from that little hole. And I've got both threads, one from my needle and one from the bobbin towards the back of the machine. Okay, for this project, I didn't have a long enough piece of fabric, so I have to sew two pieces together, and I'm just ironing out the wrinkles real quick. I've got my iron on high. I can't remember if this fabric is cotton or polyester, but it's probably polyester. And I'm not using any water or steam. I'm just doing a really quick once over just to get out all the wrinkles so I can sew it easier. Don't underestimate the power of ironing. Okay, I've ironed both of my pieces lightly, and now I'm going to do what's called right sides together. What's a right side, you might ask yourself? It's what's known as the pretty side of the fabric. There's usually a faded or back side, and then there's a pretty or bright side. I've come across some fabrics that you literally cannot tell. And if that's you, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. Just pick one. But most fabrics will have a right side and a wrong side. Now, when they tell you to put right sides together, it means they want the two pretty or bold sides to face each other. And you might think, well, gee, that doesn't make any sense because when I sew something, now it's going to be inside out. Wrong. When you sew something, you're making the seam on the inside of the fabric. So when I make a seam along here and I open it back up, it's going to have the seam on the back side, and the nice part of the fabric will be the show side. Okay, now what I need to do is pin my fabric together. I have this fancy magnetic pin holder. They're really nice because they keep all your pins together, but they're also really easy to grab. It's a worthwhile $3 investment, in my opinion. These are longer pins. You can use shorter pins. It depends on your project. Now what you're going to do is make sure your fabric is lined up. And then you want to pin through both pieces of the fabric. Sorry. Okay, and then try and keep it flat as you push it through to the other side. And don't poke yourself if you can help it. This one isn't put in very straight because I did it one-handed, but if you can try and keep them straight and then also keep part of the head out, that'll make it easier when you're sewing your seam, so your presser foot here won't run into the head of the pin. I'll show you more later. All right, I got my fabric all pinned up. Here is kind of what it looks like. I straightened out my first pin and I did about, I don't know, 3-4 inches apart. It really depends on the type of fabric you have and how precise you're going to be. A more slippery fabric, you're probably going to want more pins because it'll move around a lot, but this is a home deck fabric. It's pretty coarse and it's pretty rough. It's kind of a mid-weight, slightly heavier fabric, so I'm not really worried about it. Plus this project, I don't really care how pretty it looks. But let's talk about something else. Okay, when people say seam allowance, okay, what they mean is the distance from the edge of your fabric to where you're gonna sew. That's a seam allowance. So if someone says, oh, I have a 1/2 inch seam allowance, it means that you are going to be measuring, get a little measure stick here. You are gonna have, in the end, a 1/2 inch from the edge of your fabric to where your sewing line is going to be. So I'll be sewing right here. And that's a 1/2 inch on each side of your fabric. Okay, so I've got a 1/2 inch here, and then of course a 1/2 inch on that side. So that's kind of something to keep in mind when you're measuring your fabric. So for example, I needed a piece that was 17 inches long. And so when I measured this, I actually didn't remeasure this before I videoed, so we'll see if I'm right. This is 9 inches long, okay, but I have 2 pieces put together. So when you lay out 2 pieces of 9-inch fabric, 9 plus 9 is 18, hey, but if I'm gonna sew a 1/2 inch on each side of it, that means I'm losing an inch. So if 9 and 9 is 18 minus 1 inch, I'm getting 17 inches total by the time this is all sewn up. So we'll see if I'm right. All right, the first thing you do to start your machine is to put your fabric in here. And I want to show you these little numbers. I'll use my little measure tool. Okay, here's your needle. Your needle is 0, okay? And then the distance to the right or left of it is what you're going to measure. And on my machine, I have these little markings. There's a 3, a 4, a 5, and a 6. Those are parts of an inch in eighths. So here's 0, where the needle is. Then I believe the edge of this press fit, which isn't marked, I think that's 2. Let's measure it. Yes, that's 2/8. Then you've got 3/8, 4/8 of an inch. If you're a math whiz, is a 1/2 an inch. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind, that 4. The 5 is 5/8. That's another common measurement. And then, of course, 6/8. And then this line you can see extends, which can be helpful if you're doing a 5/8 inch seam and you are kind of lining up your fabric. You can get more of a straight seam. And then, of course, there's numbers on here too if you're sewing your seam from the opposite side. Okay, let's see how this is going to work here. Another thing to keep in mind, of course, notice I've got the heads of my pin out from the edge of my fabric, and that's so that I can both measure my seam allowance easily, and the head of the pin isn't going to interfere with this presser foot. So keep that in mind when you're pinning up. Depending on how you pinned it is how it's going to lay. So I could sew it this way, or I could sew it this way. I honestly don't know if it makes a difference, but I'm going to sew it this way. I don't know how to hold this so you guys can see. Let me figure that out. All right, here we go. I am just going up so that my fabric is almost at the end of my presser foot here. I'm going to put my presser foot down. I'm going to be sewing at 1/2 an inch. Why not? So that's on the 4/8 mark. The edge of my fabric is on the 4, the line of the 4. Another feature of my machine you may not be able to see is that there's a reverse button right here. Each machine is going to be different, but you should have one. And when you just start out, you're going to go forward about 2 or 3 clicks, or 2 or 3 passes of the needle, and then reverse it all the way to the end of your fabric to make a nice strong seam. So here we go, and forward, reverse, and forward again. Go nice and easy if it's your first time around. If you zigzag all over the place, don't worry. Just practice more on a scrap of fabric instead of your actual project. You may need to hold your fabric in a different spot. Or maybe you have this attachment like I do that you forgot to put on your machine. This just makes my surface area, my working surface area, larger. And if you have something nice and flat like this project that I'm doing, and like most projects you might be doing, you really should use it. Okay. Now my fabric should go better. Now what do you do when you come to a pin? I've got this pin here. You can run over it. Sorry. You can run over this pin, but you do risk running into the pin and bending the pin. Chances are your needle won't bend, but that's a possibility, I suppose. Or you can just take it out because your presser foot and your needle and thread are holding this fabric together now. So I can just add it to my little pin stash and keep going. Here's my next pin. My presser foot's pressing my fabric together, so I'm just gonna keep. Okay, you get the point. Okay, a few very last things here. When you get to the end of your fabric, you're just gonna finish your sew, back stitch, and then run right off the edge of the mat there. I hand crank like that to raise my needle to the top, and then you can raise your presser foot, take some of the thread out Okay, and then you can either cut it with scissors, which is what I did for like a billion years until just a month ago I found out that the back of my machine has this little hook on it right there, and that is actually a thread cutter. Who knew? And you just put your thread over it like so. Yeah, sorry you can't see that. And cut. Apparently machines have that. So there you go. The other thing I just wanted to show you real quick are some other things that you can adjust. This is pressure. I honestly don't know what that's for, so don't touch that. This is stitch width. So this is how you could make a zigzag stitch. So instead of your needle going at basically zero width, which is straight up and down, you can make it go side to side. Not that far, I'm exaggerating, but you get the point, and it makes a zigzag stitch if you're sewing like a stretchy fabric. And then the last, one of the other things I can adjust on here is my needle position. As you can see, it's set to the middle, which just means the middle here. You can set it to the left or to the right for different reasons, but for beginners, you want it dead center. This is the stitch length, which is the distance between stitches. So how far this dog tooth is going to feed your fabric through in between stitches. It can either do the tiniest little bits, you're getting little tiny baby stitches next to each other, or it can do big stitches if you need to baste something, or you, for whatever reason, want a bigger stitch. So that's what stitch length is. The lower the number, the larger the stitch. So this is going to be 6 stitches per, I don't even know, inch. I don't know how they're measuring this. Or what is this, 25 stitches per inch. So you can tell that the higher number is going to have more stitches, which means they're going to be closer together and therefore a shorter stitch. I don't know what flexi stitch is, and I also don't know what this button is for, but there are lots of things. Oh, actually I do. I looked it up in my manual. This means it's going to do a flex stitch or a zigzag stitch, and then a couple regular ones, and then a zigzag stitch. I don't know why you would need that, but it's there. But just do normal straight stitch, middle of the road, and you should be good for your first time. Okay, good luck. Homesteaders, you can do this. You can do it yourself. Learn how to sew things. Straight lines are doable.